Today on the podcast, we are joined by Geri Ellis, an executive leader with a powerhouse background in digital transformation, strategic workforce planning, and large scale tech delivery. Geri brings deep insight into aligning enterprise strategy with technology. She's passionate about building sustainable, high performing organizations that prioritize long term impact, collaboration, and customer value. Let's dive into her transformative leadership journey. Thank you, Geri. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mina. It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me.
So, Geri, you've had a remarkable career. I'm not very familiar with a lot of transformation projects that you have worked on. It's very foreign to me. It's really new, but with our conversations that we've had in the past, I found it very, very, very interesting. So, I would really like to dive into your journey where you can share some pivotal moments that shaped your leadership approach.
I actually started my career in marketing for tech companies. Those have been around for a while will remember SEO and SEO Unix and Microsoft, and I just love the pace and the vision that tech companies brought, especially software. I then switched into IT publishing. So I had this front row seat for watching the disruption that the internet was going to bring. So very much like AI now, everyone's talking about AI and all the possibilities, but we're still figuring out. But then you just sort of have that tipping point, that hockey stick effect, when it really goes incredibly fast. And I do think AI will go faster than the internet did. The internet itself, sort of being in that publishing environment, sort of drove my desire to broaden my knowledge beyond marketing. So that was quite a pivotal moment for me because I could see what the internet was going to do. And I completed my MBA to get that broader experience. And with that, then after I completed my MBA, I got the fantastic opportunity of joining 3UK, which their goal was to launch the first 3G network in the UK. It was probably the biggest startup ever and a once in a lifetime opportunity to sort of build a large scale company from the ground up. And so digital design by design was the core foundation as well as data mastery for a 3G player. Then I moved to New Zealand. And people often ask me why. And essentially it was to raise free range kids, as I call it. I wanted them to run around. But NZ was a little bit behind on the 3G front when I immigrated here. So I switched to banking for the first time. And that was quite a shock to the system. Not having grown up and understanding banking, not as a customer, but as a business, sort of coming in quite late. So the GFC then became a pivotal moment for me, and working on the sort of post GFC transformation strategy 5-year plan for BNZ at the time. At the same time, I was very fortunate that I got selected to join NAB's Academy, and they had a big academy that they used to run back then. It was a 1-year open leadership program. And that was a huge pivotal moment in terms of changing my way of thinking as a leader, and what my role was and my behavior, and everything around leading from behind. I then grabbed this opportunity to join Vodafone NZ to create and execute their digital channel strategy and create a truly high performing team. So the two pivotal moments there for me were implementing agile framework. I mean, it's quite common now, but we're talking at least 10, 15 years ago. And another one, which I may talk about later in terms of my successes, was launching iPhone. I think it was iPhone 4, where we drove the launch of iPhone 4 online as a priority channel. So was a complete number eight wire process to manually create this omni-channel experience, but it worked. And Vodafone New Zealand subsequently became a tier one market, which meant they had higher volumes and priority access to new devices. And like I said, that was probably the first time I truly experienced really effective enterprise collaboration to make it happen. There was no conflict around commissions. There were data-led decisioning that happened going forward, and it was an absolute success. And it was as I said, seeing that enterprise collaboration truly happening with a common goal, trying to achieve a single goal, but trying to achieve a common outcome collectively. That, as well as, driving self-service and app penetration as one of the highest performing markets, gave me the opportunity to join Vodafone Group. So I returned to UK for several years in the global role, supporting 21 markets. And again, looking at how do you adapt an enterprise strategy to make it relevant to markets, customers, and different operating models across those 21 markets. So that was very insightful and a fantastic learning experience for me. The last pivotal moment I could recall is when I returned to NZ, I joined NZ Post as Chief Digital and Technology Officer. And it was a huge challenge adjusting mostly to the pace and the governance of a state-owned enterprise, where political parties can quickly pivot your strategy plan. It was a very steep learning curve in all of IT. My experience was largely in front-end customer experience, as opposed to all the back-end infrastructure and all the complexities that come with growing cyber and risk management in general. So learning about change management by design was a pivotal moment. Trying to drive digital transformation in a state-owned enterprise was really hard. And definitely added a few scars along the way. Very proud of what I achieved, but God, it was hard work. And so I think the pivotal moment there is that ever since then, my passion has been about leading transformations in tech, because I just see so much opportunity, not in the technology itself, obviously is a key component, but it's ways of working, the planning and the governance efficiencies, cost management, and using data, data insights. So I do believe that, we have accumulated so much tech and organizational debt, especially in technology functions. And they're going to make or break organizations as we move into AI, because they just won't have that agility that is required. They won't have ways of working that allow them to pivot much faster. And like I said, there's just so much opportunity to free up organizations from the exponentially increasing costs associated with maintaining technology, being able to free them up to be able to invest, innovate, as I said, operate faster and keep up globally. Remaining relevant, I think, is going to be a critical point going forward.
Gosh, that was just amazing to listen to all the different projects you have worked in and the impact you have created. Now, with regards to digital transformations, right, when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, you had mentioned about focusing on customer-centric digital transformations. Now, how has that evolved over the time since you started your leadership roles?
Mm. I'd say when I started, my passion was always about what technology can enable. I don't have an engineering background, I started in marketing, but I always had a very analytical mind. So even when I moved from marketing into corporate strategy and product strategy and digital strategy, a lot of my focus was on the what. I'm now a lot more focused or passionate about the how. So the opportunities to drive that operational efficiency and organizational effectiveness through sustainable transformation. I do think there is great opportunity, and where things end up slowing companies down or impacting their competitiveness. The problem isn't the strategy. There's no shortage of ideas and advice. I mean, you could probably even get AI nowadays to write your strategy, admittedly without context. But that alignment between strategy and the execution of it, the alignment when it comes to execution, I think is where there is huge opportunity to make improvements. So I think, with that summary I gave earlier on around, I started off in marketing, corporate strategy, more on the strategy, then deep into tech, and now operational tech, and now sort of coming back out. Combining all of those together, I can see where the inefficiencies are operationally that allow technology functions to be really successful as part of an enterprise, as opposed to just that support function. So I always look at it, and this is the bottom line. Every organization I've done, it just shouldn't be so hard. How many times have you sat in a room when you're going, it shouldn't be so hard. Why can't we make it work? And tech alone will not make an organization compete effectively. So that's kind of my lens that I bring to the table. I don't just look at the tech, because we've all seen this. You can implement a great new platform, but you just don't see the benefits realized because you haven't actually built the operating model, you haven't driven the change in order to leverage what the technology allows your company to do.
Cool. So even with this conversation, as well as in the past when I've spoken to you, you are clearly very passionate about sustainable transformation. That's something that you have used, operating model. And another term that you are very passionate about is strategic workforce planning. Now, why are these such critical components in large-scale transformation efforts?
Oh, strategic workforce planning is a relatively new capability. When you come from a sort of program background, a lot of focus is always talked about resource plans and capacity plans, but it's very limited to a program or a project. And capacity, not all capacity is good capacity, and it needs broader context. So for me, transformations succeed when the right people are in the right roles with the right skills at the right time. And I'll use an analogy here, which someone shared with me once at Vodafone. And I'm not a sports fan or enthusiast, and I have very limited knowledge, but this quote still stuck with me. And that was that you can have the best players in the world, but if they're not playing in position, they'll never win a game. And that really resonated with me. So to me, strategic workforce planning is a critical capability to drive good execution, successful execution. It helps you align your capabilities to new goals and operating models. You need, without having a good, clear strategy, a strategic workforce plan won't help, because they do need to very much align to the enterprise strategy. Technology strategy aligns to the enterprise strategy, and then the strategic workforce plan comes in. So it's like taking it down the pyramid. It allows you, especially if you take a longer term view, I probably wouldn't go beyond 3 years. Where are the capability gaps? What reskilling do I need to do? What hiring do I need to do? And who do I need to redeploy? It definitely helps with managing cost pressures and delivery speed. So if you can optimize your workforce mix, your timing to manage the costs to ensure the delivery. And when I talk about workforce mix, I'm talking about, what kind of capabilities do I need in-house, which will depend, are my systems COTS, SaaS? Are they bespoke? Who do I need to have in-house? What can I offshore? What can I nearshore to actually optimize not just the capacity, but also the cost of managing that workforce, which in most organizations is the second highest cost. It also allows you to sequence the talent availability to match those delivery timelines. So this is where I'm saying tying it in with the technology strategy is critical. So whatever your modernization roadmaps look like, being able to tie in the sequences of when you need what skills by when, if you have no intention to do agentic AI for the next 2 years or 5 years, whatever it might be, there's no point hiring the skills right now, but you should still be identifying at what point do you need to bring them in, do you need to upskill internally, etc. And sort of having that alignment across your enterprise, your tech strategy, and your workforce means you're joining all the dots between all of them. And most of all, it anticipates, migrates the risks from disruption, attrition, and compliance, and especially attrition. The more legacy tech you've got, the more likely you've got key person risk. And the consequences can be dramatic, if that person's retiring, or because they've been looking after, and the sole remaining person left over who understands this highly bespoke platform that was built 20-30 years ago. You need to be able to mitigate that, whether it is looking at offshoring that capability or even bringing in graduates to upskill them on a language that doesn't maybe exist anymore, but just so you can actually maintain and manage your risk appropriately. So that's where I've become very passionate about strategic workforce planning, because going back to my earlier comment, without an effective workforce, you just have tech, but you don't execute well.
Yeah, like while you were talking, I was just thinking about the multiple dimensions you touched on, right? Like you start with the enterprise strategy, the tech strategy, and then the workforce planning. Now, this just seems like a very, very massive piece of work, right? Have you seen any organizations, especially in New Zealand, who have implemented it well?
No, is that I know there are a couple of consultancies. Look, I only came across it during a brief period I had with Capgemini Invent, and one of the things they identified was demand for strategic workforce planning post-COVID. We're going into a new world during COVID, and then after COVID, things have changed. What are we going to do as an organization to adapt our workforce and build for the future? So that was probably 21. So that was sort of 4 or 5 years ago. I do think there are some good consultancies in New Zealand. The reality is New Zealand organizations are smaller, subscale. But I still think there is a lot of opportunity to, at least start creating a 3-year view of your workforce demand and identify key skills and carry on optimizing it, making it more strategic as you develop or refine your tech strategy, so that they are continuously in sync. I mean, no strategy plan should be written in stone and forgotten. It should be, there need to be living systems that continuously evolve. So as your enterprise tech strategy evolves, so should your workforce strategy. And I would distinguish it between a workforce plan and a workforce strategy here. I would just get started, taking that 3-year view, looking at external factors, internal factors, constraints, issues. All the information is there. The biggest challenge that I have found in organizations is good people data and good analytics. But even with AI, assuming that it's safe to use, given wanting to avoid breaches of people data, um, there's lots of opportunities to automate and improve people analytics, because you do need that information to be able to then align your demand with the capacity that you've got available. Start there, but then look at, how do I create a more efficient organization as well? So, it's as much as identifying the capability gaps that stall strategy execution, as it is to, look at talent shortfall. We all know, you take on a platform. I've seen this in every New Zealand corporate I've worked at. You make a choice around a platform where demand is exponential, whether it was Adobe, Salesforce. And I remember having conversations with Salesforce in 2018 saying, you need to, do more upskilling and uplifting for the smaller markets, because you've barely got someone upskilled and then they get shoulder tapped, and it is really hard not just to build and implement these new platforms, but also to maintain them. So talent short, but I mean, there's multiple options to look at, whether you use an SI, whether you use an offshore partner, whatever it may be. As I said, New Zealand's biggest challenge is being subscale. You need to get to a certain scale where it becomes viable. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be building that muscle around strategic workforce planning to address, I think, the next wave of technology disruption that we're going to be going into, if not just to manage that increasing cost associated with managing your legacy tech stack, and the people, your workforce associated with that, as well as rising organizational debt, which I mentioned earlier on. If you're not operating efficiently and you just keep adding more onto it, you're just going to start exponentially increasing your technical debt and organizational debt, and then you can never get ahead of it. And that slows you down as an organization.
Yeah, it is very evident, right, from what you've mentioned as well. Like maybe it's the size of the country or whatnot. We probably just focus on workforce planning, maybe without context to the entire tech strategy or the enterprise strategy.
Yeah.
Have you also mentioned some of the risks associated with it as well? Is there anything else that you would like to highlight with respect to risk?
I think, well, I mean, cost is an obvious risk, because rising costs of your technology cost to maintain current future inhibits you to innovate. Your organizational debt inhibits you to operate at speed. So for those two reasons alone, I think doesn't matter whether you're operating in a scaled or subscale market, that over-reliance on contractors and unsustainable sourcing will basically remove the opportunities for you to participate, as I mentioned earlier on, remain competitive, remain relevant in essentially a global market going forward. So, yeah, lots of risks, I think, associated, and unnecessary waste, I think, especially when it comes to investment. We don't do much experimentation here, but your total investment can be so undermined by talent shortfall. You will have underused systems, failed implementations, increasing technical debt due to poor adoption. Those are the kind of things that reduce your ability to compete, whether it's in a small or a large organization or market.
So, in how does it work? Like, what time period are we looking at with regards to planning, workforce planning, or and stuff? Because I'm just thinking about technology as such, which is very fast evolving, right?
Mm.
Things that we never thought would just become a part of our work has now become so much in the mainstream, like AI, for instance. When the technology is so much changing, and now that we have started looking at agentic AI to even you convert code from one technology to another and stuff, I think, is it hard to still implement workforce strategy, like workforce planning strategy?
No, because let's go to the bottom of it. I mean, a strategy to me is a direction. It is not, and it's not written in stone. I keep saying, I think there are times where it's critical to look at horizons, and it depends on the industry. I mean, if you were in pharmaceutical or um, energy, you would be looking at 10, 15 years, 20 years, probably even more than that. I think when you look at your enterprise strategy overall, you can have your 10-year goals and certainly do your corporate strategy with that time frame. But the living system, I tend to confine to 3 to 5 years, whether it's your financial forecasts, your workforce. No, they just all join together. So your technical roadmaps, there's no point doing technical roadmaps beyond 3 years, in my view. Sure, you should have a vision of what might be happening. At what point do you have that tipping point of a particular piece of technology, reaching the masses, or becoming more viable from a cost point of view? What are those breakpoints in 5 to 10 years time? But in terms of how you're executing to your to drive growth and innovate, I think 3 years is probably a good time frame. But absolutely, it needs to be reviewed definitely annually, depending on the pace of your industry. I mean, I would say even a 3-year financial forecast should be reviewed every 6 months to identify where are there opportunities to continuously optimize, iterate. Like we do in tech discovery. With progressive elaboration. We do live in constant change, so there needs to be, as I said, good data, but to be able to analyze and improve predictability. But you need to sort of treat it as a living system that you continuously review and optimize, and therefore have the agility in the organization to be able to pivot when it's
But I'm
needed.
just thinking about the operational pressures that would actually make it even harder, right, to constantly review and change and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, look, there's some great tools, planning tools. Um, when I think about uh, the tools that I would be using more in my space, so strategic workforce planning tools, there's quite a few out there, but from my perspective, if you've got a good HR system, whether it's SAP or Workday, and you've got BI reporting, you can start. You definitely need to automate, because you can't manually review all your data points, and it's the connectivity of the data that gives you the insights. It gives you the clues to be able to spot trends or opportunities where they may occur. So yes, you can have an army of people and analysts sitting there. BI reporting, Power BI reporting is powerful from being able to manage performance, but that's rear view mirror. Forward looking requires you to be able to manipulate data to improve predictability of where you're likely to go, and that means joining the data from multiple different systems. either integrating them or, I mean, obviously your team uses Lean IX. Many companies use ServiceNow. You integrate that with some really good PPMs, portfolio planning tools, as well as, the likes of Jira. You can connect the goal and the desired outcome with the execution. And that's where I talk about being able to improve your execution by having both the agility, but also the visibility of how you are progressing end to end, and what you're doing right down here lines up to the outcomes that you want to achieve, and then having the art model that allows you to pivot and the agility to respond or change, stop work, for example, as opposed to just blindly carrying on. Yeah.
So, what does a good alignment look like with enterprise strategy and tech strategy?
Um, to me, technology, well, I do think for many organizations, again, that is slightly industry dependent, but for many organizations, technology is a core enabler of business value, differentiation, and I think resilience. It isn't just a function that supports IT. Some organizations still think like that. When I look at role descriptions, you can read straight away whether the IT function is simply seen there as a support function versus a key enabler. But without that alignment, companies do increase their risk with misdirected investments, fragmented execution, and slow adaptation to market change. So, it isn't, I come back to the fact that strategy isn't just a well-written strategy doc, it's a living system. So technology should become a strategic lever, not a cost center. You do that by having shared goals and outcomes. You need to be able to accelerate decision-making and execution, to reduce that friction or and rework caused by conflicting goals and unclear ownership. So tech and business planning should operate the same cadence. They should have, whether it's quarterly business review or PI planning, those should be happening together, not as siloed. Joint prioritization, looking at both tech priorities as well as business priorities, because both support the customer. You don't want an outage, but you also need to get a feature out there to compete. And looking at things like, collaborative funding models, having skin in the game on both sides. I think also having that alignment allows you to maximize your return on your investment. And you'll probably like this, Mina, but I do think enterprise architecture, more so now than ever, connects strategy to execution. It translates those enterprise goals into modular capabilities, and then can provide guardrails and architecture principles. Again, it's something I've seen in many organizations where there is conflicting architecture throughout the organization, due to lack of clear roadmaps to start off with, lack of sequencing. Some organizations add more debt as they're adding more features just because of the way things have been sequenced, where the business prioritization trumped the tech prioritization, as an example. The other thing is when you align enterprise and tech strategy, you also enhance the organizational agility. So cross-functional teams, they can pivot together. Like I said, you run the quarterly business review, but also your PI planning together. So when the market changes or regulation shifts, you can adapt, and the teams therefore become structured around value and stop operating as functional silos.
So now, what are the key ingredients for success in creating a high-performing team and operating model?
So I want to distinguish here, first of all, between operating model and org design. Um, my experience in New Zealand has been is that these terms have been used interchangeably, meaning different things. So for me, org design is an org structure that is optimized for an op model. So the org design is the output from the op model design. So I believe it requires, so the key ingredients of a good op model is it's a deliberate blend of structural design, cultural foundations, and performance enablers. So they do need to be backed by the right culture and systems. And the high performance is sort of the result of clear intent of what you want that operating model to achieve, enabling conditions that we talked about earlier on, having the tools. There's no point saying we're going to move towards horizon mapping and 3-year planning if you don't have the tools to do that. And then it's the continuous reinforcement that is required to make that change sustainable. So my starting point for an op model design is always having a clear purpose and shared outcomes. It is a good blend of autonomy and accountability. And I keep talking, like I mentioned earlier on, right people, right skills, and right structure. So you need the right capabilities, diversity, and the structure to solve complex problems. So, you know, it's not just the technical skills, it's also the interpersonal skills that you need to blend together. Most importantly, have absolutely clear role clarity and team composition that fits the work, and streamlining your processes to reduce that sort of friction that you can build up. Psychological safety, another key ingredient for collaboration. Seamless ways of working and tooling, mentioned several times now here, but well integrated practice of platforms. I have seen too much autonomy where teams have more or less created their own adventures. So you do need to have a degree of standardization and guardrails in order to get the efficiencies, get the data, the performance metrics, being able to compare apples with apples. But you don't want to create a rigid structure at the same time. So when I talk about seamless ways of working, it's around how do you create frictionless engagement across functions within an enterprise, and how do you provide the right tooling to work collaboratively on, so the right collaborative tools as well.
Cool. So, in the recent years, right, whenever I've heard of the word transformation project within any organization, it almost inevitably means there's going to be another restructure within the teams.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but how do we make sure that it just doesn't equate to just another restructure, but actually shift the way organizations work?
Look, it's hard. Strategic workforce planning helps with that because you've actually thought about your operating model as part of your strategic workforce plan. So going right back to, you know, what's the purpose of this organization? What are we trying to achieve? Then you look at what is the operating model, and the strategic workforce plan gives you that map. I think structure is only the beginning. Behavior is the true transformation. And that operating model, as I sort of said, it becomes a way of enabling new business behaviors, decision rights, and value delivery. But even with the structure, if you're doing the structure, there needs to be clear intent and outcomes. You know, what's the business problem you're trying to solve? And we kind of do that. But look, I do think restructures are often an excuse for lack of maturity around leadership and performance management. It becomes an easier way out to do another restructure. But let's assume you have a good org design and you're running a restructure off the basis of that. As I said, clarity around the problem that needs to be solved, Whether that's faster time to market, you want clearer accountability, you want better customer alignment, you're going to switch to a different way of working. I think that's the starting point of any structure, and you do often start with that. I think it's important to redesign the ways of working, not just the roles. You look at job descriptions, and traditional job descriptions focus on these are your responsibilities, and this is what you're accountable for. But they can be so broad that you can have 4 or 5 different roles that basically have the same accountabilities, that are slightly nuanced. So I think investing the time in your job architecture and being clear about how those roles are going to work together helps you break down more specifically whose accountability for what. So you need to pair those new structures with workflows and governance, and sort of the collaboration that is required to achieve that outcome. As I mentioned, sort of making sure those decision rights and the ownership match the new structure. There is often an assumption, especially in more hierarchical organizations, that a job title defines accountability, and it doesn't, and it shouldn't. So having that clarity around who owns what, on the outcomes, not just the tasks, can be super helpful as well. I already talked about sort of having the right technology and the skills and the metrics around that, but having that alignment as well is critical. And I think lastly, structures, whether the reason for doing it, which is the wrong reason, purely for cost or for performance management, the right reason is to get improve your operational efficiency at the end of the day. So in order to make that sustainable, you do need to have an element of governance and rhythm around that. So you've got to operationalize that model, establish those cadences, those forums, those feedback loops. And sometimes it's worth, depending on the size of the structural change or the op model, it's useful to pilot, experiment in the same way as you do with technology. See, does that work? Does it make us work more efficiently? Has it improved decisioning with less escalations? Pilot it, learn from it, and then scale it. Many organizations have adopted domain models. And you can spend 6 to 8 months trying to work out what your domains are, but then also doing the associated restructures with it, and etc., building the entire end-to-end operating model. The starting point needs to be sort of being directionally right, and just starting with the alignment of people, process, and technology, and then you just continuously iterate and evolve that operating model. So just like a strategy, an operating model should never stand still. You wouldn't implement a platform and then forget about it, some do, but you'll get caught out if you're not patching. You'll not be able to deliver great customer experiences if you don't maintain the technology that serves customers, etc. So it's an organic living thing that you just need to continuously look at and saying, how can we work better? And this is why some of the cadences, like doing regular retros, it's not just looking at the team of how we can work better, but how can we work better as an organization? Can we do something differently if this isn't working, etc.
Wow, it's just amazing, and it just feels like you are living and breathing strategic workforce planning and operating model and
I
enterprise strategy, tech strategy.
I try to always wear a systems mindset, or not wear, but wear a systems hat, but always think across the entire system in a sort of connected ecosystem. Because change is hard, but it's unavoidable. I mean, it is constant around us. And so inevitably, like with anything we do in life, it's you're constantly learning to adapt to your life, the changes that happen in your life, your workplace, your friendships.
One thing, it's a personal question, Jerry. I'm just wondering, like, how did you, like, you are in a very, you've been in a very challenging roles, right? Leading
Mm.
transformational projects and stuff. How did you manage having kids at home, being a mom, having family responsibilities, and working on transformational projects throughout your career?
Uh, it was hard. Uh, and it still is hard. Well, it's less hard. I'm an almost empty nester, as I call it. When your children become boomerangs, like they keep leaving the home and then they keep coming back. Um, so, look, it's hard. In addition, I was a solo parent for most of it. Um, Great family support, great childcare, full-time childcare that gave me the flexibility. But look, at the end of the day, um, I I would say I was a better parent off the back of being able to do something that I'm passionate about. Not say, a stay-at-home parent role, I knew I never wanted to do. I love my kids. They are the best thing, the proudest thing of any of my achievements. Um, Parenting, God, um, transformation projects, I walk in the park compared to parenting. So coming to work is a reprieve. I'm very focused on the work, and I've always been passionate and I've enjoyed working and solving problems. The second thing that has always driven me is the two goals I had for my girls is I wanted to, or my parenting goals was I wanted to raise two strong, confident, independent women. I think I've got there. So I'm very proud of that. And they needed a role model, just like women in the workplace need a role model to see what they can do. And I mentioned very briefly at the beginning when we talked about what I was up to at the moment and thinking about writing a book. My eclectic family is a long line of female leaders, right through to my great grandparents, and then my grandmother, ironically, in banking in the 50s, held a leadership position. My mother, speaks five languages and has always worked. So I've never lived in a situation where I've had a stay-at-home parent. And I think that probably has made me and my children my girls quite independent. And there's also a belief that you can always make the impossible possible. There's a solution to everything, and you can solve it. So it's yeah. Look, it's been hard. You can't have it all. I've made trade-offs along the way, and I've also had to deal with enormous amounts of guilt, which has always been my Achilles heel, never quite thinking I am doing as good as I could at work, or I'm doing as good as I could at home. So the guilt is the nemesis of career parents, I think.
So now, digital transformation, obviously, you don't really see many women out there, right, in these
Mm.
roles. What would be your advice for emerging leaders who might be thinking, wow, what Jenny has done is amazing. I would love to do something like that. So what would be your advice to them? How do we start? What is a special ingredient that you had to help you progress?
Um, I don't know if I've got a special ingredient. I think from the conversation we already had, my whole environment, being brought up in two different countries, multiple different cultures, and being analytical, having done both operations and strategy, what I have found helps me, and um, I do think is my superpower, is joining the dots, um, and improving the probability around and your predictability around doing things. I would say, um, for emerging leaders who want to get involved in transformation, think systems, not silos. There is no such thing as a transformation that takes place in a single function or a single project. Invariably, it's an entire system. So understand the different parts of the organization, how they interconnect, and work beyond your domain. Most importantly, I think, is connecting everything you do to enterprise goals. Now, that sounds easier than it actually is to achieve, because first of all, you need the clarity around what the enterprise goals are. Then they should not be conflicting with each other, which often is the case as well. They should be customer focused, etc. They should be tangible and measurable. And once you've got good goals, then you should be able to connect everyone in the organization and then create that connection between goal, outcome, and execution. I think leading with purpose and clarity, transformation is inevitably going to bring ambiguity, and you don't know what you don't know. And whether that's a skill, a piece of technology, or a different process. So being able to align teams on the outcome, so reinforcing the why behind the change. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to achieve, is the most important part. And if you get it wrong, you get it wrong, but at least you've got something to anchor back to. I mean, I'm not a deep technical expert, and I'm no longer a deep marketing expert, but regardless, I think these days everybody should, regardless of whether your business or tech, needs to understand the tools and the data shaping your particular industry. So you got to stay curious around emerging tech, AI, and automation. This is going to take off really, really fast, and you're going to be caught out, and you're going to have to pivot on your strategies and your operating models pretty fast, because I think what we're going to see happening with AI and the automation, and by the way, I don't necessarily think AI is going to replace jobs. I think it's going to create different jobs. And agentic AI requires humans as well as AI to be able to work effectively, in my opinion. So I think you need to stay curious about this, because this is going to happen at such a fast pace compared to the internet, which basically changed most of our lives within a decade, right? But I would say this to anybody, not just as a leader: learning mindset. Change is constant. You got to prioritize continuous learning as well as unlearning. Something I neglected a little bit in the last 3 years, and I tend to do that when I get stuck into transformation projects or any kind of program or large scale program that I get involved in. Yes, you learn on the job, but that sort of additional broader learning is important to broaden the mind, support the systems thinking, and evolve both leadership skills, but also the way you think and the way you operate in an organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Geri. Thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome.